Greetings, everyone. I'm Karthik from Maithri Aquatech, and we welcome you to the third episode of AquaTalks, our webinar series promoting thought leadership and knowledge sharing in the sphere of water. We would first like to acknowledge the support of Rotary Bangalore Whitefield Central, in collaboration with whom we bring you this week's episode. We also thank the Rotarians participating in this episode. For today's episode of Sustainable Water Development in Rural Areas, we have invited the panelists, Ms. Seemantinee Khot. She is a sustainable development professional with nearly 4 decades of experience in the development sector, 20 years of direct implementation with NGOs, 12 years of bilateral aid and UN assignments, and 8 years in CSR and sustainability consulting. Having completed several professional assignments across all the continents, she's also proud to be known as a farmer. Currently, she's a senior evaluation specialist at the Food and Agricultural Organization at the United Nations, and is also a partner at the Chai Strategic Advisors LLP, a niche consulting firm that provides professional services to corporates, SMEs, nonprofits, governments, and civil society organizations for enhancing sustainable development endeavors. She's also the independent director of boards at the Suzlon Energy Limited, SE Forge, Suzlon Global Services Limited, and Anik Financial Services Private Limited. She's also the founder member of the Every Woman Everywhere initiative on violence against women, the Carr Center for Human Rights, and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Along with Ms. Seemantinee Khot, we also have Mr. Professor Solomon Darwin, who will be joining us shortly as he's busy with a prior engagement. But Mr. Solomon Darwin is an executive director at the Center for Corporate Innovation and also an executive director at the Center for Growth Markets at the University of California, Berkeley's Management Institute, Berkeley-Haas. He has broad leadership experience in corporate management and academia. He's also an international speaker recognized by peers, executives, and students with numerous awards to his innovative leadership and also has a passion for teaching. He has worked with various organizations for open innovation, business models, smart cities, scalable smart villages, with the IBM Watson supercomputer, and also business models for emerging economies. As an expert in open innovation and open business models, he's an advisor to senior executives of multinationals and government leaders in the emerging world. The list includes Google, Genentech, HP, HealthNet, J&J, Toyota, NHS of UK, UCSF, Royal Caribbean, Autodesk, Nestle, and government entities in Mexico, China, Russia, India, Colombia, and Europe. He's also known as the father of the Smart Village movement, which is an initiative that aims to foster growth and empower rural communities in India through the employment of digital technologies and an open innovation platform. During the session, any questions that the participants may have can be entered into the Q&A section that is on the user interface. These will be answered in the session towards the end of the program. I now hand over the platform to our first speaker, Ms. Seemantinee Khot. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Karthik, for that elaborate introduction.
Yes, of course.
And a very good afternoon from India to all participants. I believe people are joining even from outside of India. It's indeed a privilege and a huge opportunity to connect with you all. The fact that you're joining this, you consider sustainable water in rural areas as an important issue to attend. And I thank Maithri, the Meghdut, and the Rotary for this feat. Well, in the introduction, it was rather clear that even though the issue is global, I'm not the presenter for the global scenario. I rather would like to go for the local aspects of it, because rural water management is a global issue, all right, but I believe that it needs local solutions. And I'm sure most of you have dabbled into it at your own level, one way or the other, and are looking for tips, learnings, directions to make it as impactful as you desire. And all the data tells us that we are far away from that desirable, impactful world, even though sustainability of water harvesting, conservation, management efforts have been taken up by various collaborations, particularly today I would like to talk also about Rotary. It has remained a challenge, I believe, because if it was the solutions were implemented sustainably, we wouldn't be conducting these episodes after episodes on various platforms. Maithri is, of course, bringing a new hope of generating water, which we never thought would be a possibility. And I wish all the best for this technology. I know very little about it, actually. But I do know that Rotary in particular has in recent years developed a lot of interest in water related projects. I come from a Rotary District 313, and I do see that there's an upsurge of projects and very, very thoughtful one. I know today I'm talking thanks to the Bangalore Whitefield Central Rotary Club, but I would really urge that the projects that are happening in Pune with Rotary District 313 are something that are worth visiting. I think a good practices are here. Many clubs are partnering with the villages for rainwater harvesting, building small check dams, installing demonstrations of rooftop harvesting in schools, in health centers, installing a range of hand wash stations in schools. But more importantly, facilitating even water audits. And very few people have worked on this. So I have seen a few Rotarians in particular and good friends of mine. I hope they're joining today. I've asked Satish Khade to also join, who goes and tirelessly conducts this water audits from village to village, telling them that if this is what you're getting, plan your cropping, plan your livestock, plan your life to make sure that you're within your budgets of water, that you're able to use your water conscientiously and not, for example, take up cash crops like sugarcane and fruits when for the subsistence crops there won't be enough water. So this district is also organizing a whole lot of water Olympiads. I believe there is this 5th or 6th year where they do felicitate students who are innovating in the space of water. They are also inviting various NGOs to come and present innovative projects that have impacted to a large extent, which are replicable in nature, which are not very high cost and others can replicate. So I'm glad I'm speaking from a district. I'm also a GSE member for Rotary, so I owe them quite a lot. So what I'm going to do is, while Professor Darwin can give his macro perspective on water, I'm going to share some very micro experiments. Today, most of the water related work is actually seen particularly by government and international aid organizations as civil engineering work, building structures, if not very big, medium-sized dams. Use of earth-moving machinery for deepening water bodies has really gone in a very, very big way. Today, if in any village there is any work on water, the people who really, really thrive are the people who have JCBs and pokelands. You can be rest assured that if there are more bookings for this, there must be a large watershed projects in that area. But I believe that it has to be seen as not a hardware project, not a project that builds only structure, but works on mindsets, works on perspectives, behavior, habits, without which sustainability will remain challenging. And examples that I intend to share are on the contrary of small, decentralized efforts that involve appropriate technologies, indigenous knowledge, practices, and most importantly, community participation and governance. I'm hoping to draw these lessons for future work. So before I start giving you these examples, I would really like to touch base on, I'm just trying to see if I could present my, yeah. I hope the screen is visible.
It's visible, ma'am.
Yeah, great, thank you. So what I just wanted to touch base on some real facts, are the ones which really bother us most. Now, on this topic, world over, so many people have written, talked, and experimented. But the ones which I find in my work most disturbing and most urgent to address, particularly on today's topic of sustainability of water in rural areas. One thing that the data tells us is that drinking water availability in urban and rural areas is different. For example, in India, they say that per capita availability should be 200 liters. Now, the cities are told to make sure that there is at least 135 liters of water per person. But in the same state, nearer to the same city, for which 135 liters and 140 liters. Why don't you guys go and I'll take over. Actually, the rural households see that their water consumption is not more than 50 to 60% of what is already available in the city. So there is big disparity between urban and rural. And this is particularly ironical because most of the rainwater, which is the main source of water, it falls on lands that are in rural terrains. So the catchments, the wells, the rivers, the lakes, the water bodies are actually predominantly, because in a country like India, we have that larger expanse. The other very disturbing fact in rural areas, and most of my observations will be based on India naturally, but I have traveled in other countries, and particularly in underdeveloped and developing countries. Even though the numbers may change, I don't think the trend is very different. So in rural areas, whatever water is available, and they do say the 69% of the total water is consumed for agriculture, so most of the water, but also 60-70% of the people are in rural areas, and nearly 80 to 90% of the land mass is in rural areas. So within the available water, there are tremendous deviations in who gets how much water. So naturally, those who have larger land masses, pieces, and on the location, most of them, when it comes to rainwater harvesting, or when it comes to any work for water conservation, most of this work actually happens on the ridges, and the benefits come in the valley. And who holds larger land masses in the valley? It is very clear that there are interclass disparities and deviations in available water, and both access and consumption for agriculture purposes then varies. And then one class, which very minimal, what we call as small and marginal farmers, get very little water compared to the irrigated farmers, the landlords, those who take cash crops and very intensive, water intensive crops, are the ones with the other class. And this is a real issue also in India. It's not like in many other cases in India. Distribution is the real problem, not only availability. But in case of water, even availability is going to be a problem, because there is severe extraction of water from groundwater sources. It's so exploited that I do remember as a child in a very drought prone area, 100 feet, I mean, in those days, water depth used to be measured by how many man heights. Like if a man is 6 feet, then when they say 3 man heights, teen purush bolte hai. So that means 21 feet. And I do remember 4 man heights, 5 man heights used to be considered as really very, water has gone down very much. But today, nobody talks of less than 300 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. And I know of area where even 2,000 feet below groundwater level, and there are new pump sets which are being developed to extract water from that level. So definitely there is very high exploitation. Of course, it's owing to the population growth, demands of the cities nearby for water, industrial growth. There are so many reasons, and also the lifestyle changes and the food water consumption, which is related to food security and pressure to produce more food. And in rural areas, water has a very direct implication on food production. And when there is not enough food production, when a certain class doesn't get enough water, is not able to cultivate, not able to make two ends meet, then they will rush to the cities, thereby, having stress migration, and urbanization has its own sets of problems. But in the village itself, I do remember we were taught in school that fragmentation of land is the real issue. That if a family has 4 children, land gets divided into 4, they further have 2 children, it further gets divided. But what we see today in the same area where I grew up, now I'm a farmer back there, is their aggregation of land, not fragmentation. So poor people are selling their lands, and richer people, in the name of farmhouses or in the name of tree plantation, are acquiring more and more lands. And the average land plot size in states like Maharashtra, which is distinctly a different state, is on an increase already. And this will have implications. Now, when the lands are being made NA, that is non-agricultural, and there are deforestation, there is water shortage, climate change is happening, from lesser land, there is push to acquire, push to produce more food. And when this happens, chemical farming is pushed. So the way farming happens, it also not only takes more water, but it spoils the water, both underground, irrigated, and the one that flows away. Today, 70 to 80% of the rural water, according to, and some reports even say 85%, they say is not drinkable. In fact, 1.5 million children even die of bad water. One could actually classify all these problems into various classes, analyze it in different ways. But for me, not having enough water, it declining, it has implication not just on health, but also on food production, migration, crime, everything. So water is central to most of the socioeconomic problems in countries, not just in India, but like India. So this, according to me, the water problem that is being discussed in many forums is actually focused more on urban areas, because urban centers, being financial hubs, can afford more even debates, afford more consultations, afford more visibility, and where there is money, they almost attract everything, including water. So for me, to highlight that it's not just water scarcity and poor management of water in rural areas, it is the soul of any nation's further growth. So I will stop here on the issues. And what are the solutions being thought of? How is this issue being addressed? And when I say addressed, by whom? Governments, non-governmental organizations, even civil society organizations like Rotary clubs. Most of the work that is happening in the name of water, rainwater harvesting, water conservation, is actually work of brick and mortar. And this is a tragedy in countries which is already deficit for funds, is spending so much more on just constructions. And what happens when these constructions take place is even more soil erosion, displacement of communities. In fact, even just movement of various earth moving machineries are causing degradation, more cutting of trees. You go to any rural area today, there is a new class. People who have these tractors, JCBs and pokelands today are the richest people. This is a new class, and you will see that there is severe competition to get government contracts to do projects which are under very nice names of whether Jalaswaraj or you name it. And there is interest for most people because they can perhaps find larger margins when it comes to these kind of large projects. And agriculture practices, just a moment. Sorry that my phone is almost going to go out of charge. So, and the way government schemes also are supporting more digging of holes in the name of wells and in the name of creating what they call as water ponds. If there is good planning for it, fine. But if just to get subsidies, just to have another low interest loan, if these kinds of projects are done, they turn out to be very expensive. And the way water treatment is also happening is also something that is a clear indication that this is not something that can be upscaled and reach everyone. So in short, most of the widely used solutions for treating availability of water, harvesting of water, conservation of water, utilization of water, filtering of water, whatever, are not sustainable. They cannot be started and ended with by community. There is heavy dependence on outsiders. And no wonder then if people like Rotary are approached and told, see, this is our problem. Of course, people sitting in the cities are very sympathetic to it and don't mind partnering it. But it very, very often does become very externally driven and external and dependent on resources and technologies outside of their area. So lack of community engagement and communities' ownership, communities' governance of these solutions really are the problems. I will now go on to share with you some examples of local and decentralized appropriate technologies that have worked. And the way those have worked are actually thanks mainly to really collaborations that have taken into consideration local interests. I'm going to show you examples that are from India. I'm going to show you examples that you will certainly not have seen on the net or anything, because these are the things that we have created on the ground, and we have partnered with it with some of the organizations. And today I'm mostly going to show you actually from our work at Suzlon, where I first hated CSR, but now I'm on the board of directors. So how some of the problems, and the first film that I intend to show you is on in the deserts, how we were able to create water availability and save drudgery of women. Just a moment. And I'm showing you this particular these particular films actually because I think I lost the screen. Is it? Have I lost the screen? Let me show. Are you able to see a film? And don't worry.
Yeah, it's visible now.
Yeah, it is just, and just see the terrain. If something like this can happen in an area, this is a very interesting area in deserts. The other side is actually Pakistan, and water shortage is so high. It rains once in 2 or 3 years. Total rainy days in last 10 years have been less than 10 rainy days per year. And that means if it rains for like 5 minutes, it next time rains only after a year or something like that. So in this area where women walk 5 to 10 kilometers, we just checked with people, from where do you get water then? How do you survive? Of course, other than water, the way they survive is also a story, but let me show you how they do it. And let me do the sound because so they just used to go in search of water, and in some places they might find. Now, these are the water tanks that traditionally they had, and we only recreated them by talking to local people on how the locations are selected. Because once there is a bit of rain, where does it flow? Where does it store? Which kind of trees are then around? So there are a particular kind of trees, they know that water will be somewhere nearby. And just by consulting these local women, actually, we were able to do these small tanks. And
मारे ले ना होते हैं दो गड़ा लाओ दिन भर में मारे तो टाबर पिज्जा का ना टाबरों धुआं था कौन ना मातो जब कर टाबरों धुआं तो ये तो मारे समस्या घणी होती पहली बरसात हुए तो को भरी जे पास मन पीऊ न खाई जो ते ओपन लाता दिन में मारे टाबर का जो गड़ा ले ना तो टाबर पिज्जा था पास आता जड़े वो तो गाबो धुआं कौन मातो धुआं खेती दूर का वो जाए साड़ी दो को भरी तो मैं उठूं पानी ले ना आता 5 किलोमीटर में पानी आता दिन भर में खपते जन 4 गड़ा निट पहुंचता पानी मिले सा मन समाचार पानी मिले उन्नाले री में मारे सा नवाड़ो तो मारे पानी फायदो ही से मेरे हैंग फायदो सा पानी पीने वास्ते नहाने वास्ते मारे सब फायदो शुद्ध पानी मिल जा मन बच्चों ने फायदो सा हमें माते मारे नॉन करा दो कपड़ा दो टे मारे स्कूल जाए करा
so I'll just stop here. Look at of course, you don't get too many women to speak to you, but this is a good representative. She says that I get 4 pots of water. That is about, let's say, 40 liters or so for the entire family. And for that, she thanks. She says, now we can bathe. Now we don't waste time. Children can go to school. Our animals are giving slightly more milk now. So the way she looks at just reduction of her drudgery and time for fetching water adds to the quality of her life. Now, this is an extreme case really, where even for drinking, a glass of water will be so precious that people would, at the as their last rites, when somebody asks for glass of water, it is considered as a big how do you call it, punya, that you earn blessings of these people. So water can be really a very invaluable commodity, and these kind of small projects have made such a big difference. These women, then we could organize, they got into women's self-help groups. We started some businesses with them of small embroidery, selling their things. But they said this all became possible, and they started earning anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 rupees after doing all their housework and livestock work. All these days, thanks to just these kind of tanks. One tank per 20 kilometers, per 10 kilometers made such a huge difference in that area. Not just and therefore what do women in that area think about water is really very, very important, and the way they themselves give you solutions. Actually, here is, I'm going to show you another example, and this is from Khot, Gujarat. This is again a very semi-arid region, perhaps not as deserted as you saw in Rajasthan, but very similar, where excessive use of water, excessive use of chemicals in agriculture meant that they were not able to drink local water. It was very polluted.
बाद में वो पानी खराब हो जाता है, फिर भी वो लोग वही पानी यूज करते हैं.
તળાવનું તો ખરાબ છે ને એટલે ન પીવાય ને એવું તો. હા, એ તો અમે આ ખારું પાણી પીતા હતા. હા.
So they were doing this, drinking this kind of water. What the local people themselves suggested, what that when
हमको सिर्फ लोगों को पानी पीने का नहीं देखना है, क्योंकि जो व्यवसाय उसके साथ जुड़ा है, जो पशुपालन कर रहे हैं, उसको पशु को भी पानी पीने का मिले, वो भी जरूरी है. और जनरली ये प्रॉब्लम समर में ज्यादा होती है कि जब तालाब में सूख जाते हैं तो उस वक्त पानी का प्रॉब्लम होता है, और मालधारियों को माल लेके दूर दूर तक पानी पिलाने के लिए भी जाना पड़ता है. तो हम लोग जो प्लानिंग करते हैं उसमें पशुओं को पानी पीने का कैलकुलेशन भी करते हैं और लोगों को पानी पीने का कैलकुलेशन भी करते हैं.
So this is kind of a filter well where water was getting accumulated from all sides, but they created a well inside so that the water that gets into this well is actually getting automatically filtered, and that makes it very, very interesting actually. Let me show you another example where again local people suggested that our grazing lands need to be brought under cultivation, and this can be done with a local technique of what they call as khadeen, jahan pani khada rehta hai, where water gets accumulated, and just by constructing small walls, this is a complete barren land. We just had our first turbine, and on this barren land they used to have grazing before. With their help at the appropriate places, when we constructed this small blocks for water to flow, water actually started percolating. Luckily for us, it's also rained during those 1 or 2 years, and the soil moisture maintenance made such a big difference that people then wanted to actually take some crops there. And what crops could be taken? And we thought that the local variety of bajra is really the best because it actually takes less water. But then there was so much wind that soil erosion also had to be stopped. Soil and water erosion are very connected, as you can imagine. So use of local techniques like use of thor to work as live edge fence, so that when it's windy, the soil won't fly away. And we realized that just 2 seasons like this, soil was already there. And before we could turn our 1 or 2 turbines into 163 turbines, what we had ended up doing for local people who didn't like wind energy before, they said that, well, if you are able to convert our land from this piece to this piece, we want to collaborate with you. So this technique, that this is such a flat land, who knew that just creation of soil moisture could give them such big results? That was at least not something that we had thought. So I could actually go on, but I realized that time may not be enough. I do have a few films. I could send those over. Building of small dams or efforts which are more holistic for ecosystem have really helped. And in all of them, there are some things in common. This is what something that we did through Suzlon, and I am associated with many other organizations also, which are able to take people along and create water conservation, water harvesting, water recycling as a culture, as a movement. Pani Foundation people know, and I have seen myself villages which were hardly motivated to do any Shramadan, to contribute anything from their side, how they are actually engaging in large scale land development activities. In projects like rejuvenation of rivers, where both sides of a river for 1 kilometer, plantation of forest and fruit species to improve soil moisture so that water extraction will reduce, and thereby within the available water we will be able to have more green cover. And if possible, the fruit trees in this particular project are more important, because if 60-80% of the people in the water basins actually use wood as their fuel, and if uncooked food is available, would that make a difference is really a quest in this particular project of a rally for rivers. We have heard of Rajendra Singh ji, who's created a chain of tanks across Rajasthan where they can even grow basmati today. There are models of Pani Panchayat. There are so many Hivre Bazaar and Raiganj Siddhi. I'm sure you've heard from Maharashtra, and in your states also, in Karnataka, there will be. I know in Karnataka, the Water Gandhi Ayappa, who has given very specific solutions to specific areas. And he's the one who has actually such large indigenous knowledge and practice collection that he is applied across Karnataka. So there will be everywhere, efforts that are laudable, and all the problems that I listed in the beginning and the reason for unsustainability, we see in these kind of small efforts addressed. What is common in efforts for making water management sustainable in rural areas is basically taking an ecosystem enhancement approach. It's not just construction or just water. Along with that, if we are able to look at what is women's drudgery, which kind of trees will give livelihoods to people, what kind of non-forest timber species are available in that area, what kind of crop combinations would make a difference in nutrition. So the approach is human and ecosystem enhancement to boost local economy by enhancing the local environment. If that is an approach, we have very often seen that such projects become sustainable irrespective of who's funding them. Every time having someone externally coming and doing it has severe limitations, though they are very much required. I'm not saying cannot be done without that. What is common to I gave you only 2 or 3 examples, but there are so many in which we see that the successful project definitely have one thing in common, and they are all community centric. The problem statement is, if not defined, at least endorsed by the local community. People participate in designing the solution, actually implementing it, monitoring it, and they think that it's their project. Then only it works. No amount of great technology and great budgets have been able to convert any areas or transform any areas into water plus areas. Wherever it has happened, this one thing is definitely in common. And a combination of indigenous and appropriate technologies. If one was working, the other was not required. But the fact that over the generations, some of the indigenous technologies are now fading, are less relevant or less impactful, and therefore looking at how we can combine those with with experiences from other regions. And this very often could also come from academic institutions. And this kind of combination of the 2 types of methods of addressing issues, what we traditionally knew, conventionally did, and what is science application is making possible today, this also then demands collaboration across sectors, and that becomes very, very valuable. And taking into consideration drinking water, farming, livestock, and other livelihoods, you heard perhaps some people saying in the film that I showed you that our planning was not only to get good water, but our planning was to also see how youth will stay back, how livestock also has some arrangement so that they are not coming and drinking from the same pool where human beings are washing their clothes and drinking their water. So this kind of a very holistic view for every water scheme becomes very important. When I see today plastic pots being distributed, or support that comes for taking few more bore wells because the earlier ones are not yielding any water. The problem is of what will happen when they become dysfunctional. So most of the projects that I support may look very small, but the small, as Schumacher said, is beautiful. It can be replicated. Large, people think 10 times whether to do it. Can we do it? Can we manage it? But very simple, small things become adaptable. And I'm not saying replicable necessarily, because
I'm sorry for cutting in. We're pressed for time. So
yeah.
Is it all right if you move on to the next panelist?
No,
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Oh, you gave an
slide. Yeah.
Sorry, ma'am?
So I hope I was able to list today's problems and perhaps give some hints on what would make solutions more sustainable. So thank you.
I mean, yes, you've given an incredible insight on what can be done, especially in the rural spaces and the trouble they're facing in those areas. Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to our next panelist, Professor Solomon Darwin. As I've said, he's a professor from the University of California, Berkeley's business school, Berkeley-Haas, and he's done quite a bit of work in the smart village movement. So over to you, Mr. Darwin. Mr. Darwin, are you there?
Can you folks hear me?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
I just want to apologize up front that I'll be reaching my hotel in a few minutes. I am driving, but don't mind the background noise. I hope you can hear me clearly so I can start speaking to you.
Yes, you're clear.
Wonderful. Seema has given us a great view of the problems that we're facing at the local level, India level, and people level. And I just want to kind of give my insights because I'm not a water expert. I just want to give my insights about globally what is happening in this world with water. As you all know, there's only 2% of the water on Earth that sustains the planet. Without that 2%, there won't be any life on Earth, even though we have a lot of water. It's mainly salt water. And that is why when I teach business classes at Berkeley, when someone asks me, what is the best investment you can ever make? I always tell them the best investment is not in the stock market. The best investment that is sustainable for the long term is land right next to a freshwater river, because the fresh water, the rivers, are the sources of life. They are the ones that irrigate our soils, grow food, and sustain our bodies. And that is the most precious asset we have. It's more precious than gold, because you cannot eat gold or diamonds. These are assets that have no utility, but water is an asset that's very precious and has great utility. And so that's one of the things, my answer to my students who are aspiring to say, what is the best investment? That is the best investment is water. And the problem globally is that we have not learned how to harness that water, because most of that water ends up in the wrong places and it is not properly managed. The water grids are not as efficient in India or elsewhere in the world. So I wrote a book, and I just hope that some of you may want to get to read that book. It's about the balance sheet of the earth. The earth has a balance sheet. Just like every corporation has assets, the earth has assets. And one of those most precious assets that sustains life on the planet is water. And one of the things that you over time is the balance sheet of the earth. The value is shrinking of all the assets. The assets are shrinking, the entire balance sheet and the value of the planet is declining exponentially because we have been poor stewards and managers of the planet. It's not the animals that are doing a disservice, it's the human beings that are exploiting these resources. So the book talks about that the earth has a balance sheet, but it does not have a CEO. You know, every corporation has a balance sheet, and there's a CEO who manages the balance sheet to grow the balance sheet of the company. But Earth has none. So as a result, what happens is companies extract from the Earth's balance sheet and grow their balance sheet. So the equity or of all the balance sheets of corporate balance sheets have exponentially increased. If you do a graph, there's an exponential increase of corporate balance sheets. But when you look at the Earth's balance sheet, it declines exponentially. And a lot of that has to do with assets. One of the assets is water. And because we contaminate it, we misuse it, we abuse it, we think it's free and everyone should get it. But that's one thing that we have to learn. So this book that I wrote, how to think like the sea, the declining balance sheet of the earth, is available to you on Amazon. And I think it's a good reading. I feel that every person, every kid that's growing up need to read that book because it kind of talks about the value and how everything is interrelated on the planet. And water is one of those things. And it is a big concern to me because I also, a few years ago, I started the Smart Village movement. And one of the bigger concerns in villages in India is water. It is always mismanaged. It ends up in the wrong place. It's contaminated, but it is the one that sustains our bodies. And the other thing I also want to say about the book is that I think we need to relearn and rethink and get re-educated about how we think about water. And I believe that technology is the salvation for us in creating more abundance of water. And one of the things that we are working in Smart Villages is how do you create drinking water and pure drinking water. And we also want to think about, how do we not only prevent and contamination, but we also want to make sure that we create water from air. And that's one of the things that we are really learning very, very much. There are 2 or 3 technologies that we experimented with the Smart Villages. And one of them is called the company that's sponsoring this event. And it's a great source. Air is a great source of water. And the technology turns air into water, which is a very precious commodity. And I think technology is the savior for the future. And I think we're looking toward technological solutions to make this happen. In the Silicon Valley, we have 2 or 3 technologies that are working toward this. So I'm hoping that that we can move forward in a different, with not only on the stewardship area to bring some accountability into the system, but we also need to look at technology also as a solution. So I would like to ask Seema ma'am one question as I go through the security gate. So the question that I would like to ask her, if she's still around with us, is what is the biggest challenge that you see, ma'am, in India or in the world as far as the water is concerned from all your experience? I know there are many challenges. What is the biggest challenge that you feel that we need to focus on if we were to invest all our resources?
Mm-hmm. Almost all problems are interconnected, but over-exploitation, extracting more water from ground storages as well as surface water, without replenishing it back. So what a use pattern basically. In rural areas, agriculture.
Yes, I think um, one of the areas that I feel that we really need to focus on is education. I think the education has to come from, when we were children. I grew up in a village in India, in East Godavari near Rajahmundry, and we took water for advantage, and we were not educated about how precious water is. So I grew up with a lot of ignorance, but I think that's one area is just in the area of becoming more aware about how important this water is. And the reason I wrote this book called The Declining Balance Sheet of the Earth, there is a website that you may all want to go to. It's called thebalancesheetoftheearth.org. And I use the United Nations data. And every year you can see how there's a decline in all of these assets of the planet. So I'm hoping that I wish that every child could read it and understand the awareness of the planet and how water is one of the major ingredients in the health of a planet, whether it's plant life or animal life. And that's my contribution to society based on my research on what I can help create that awareness, because I'm not a water expert, but I'm working on that. And the other thing that we're also working at UC Berkeley is how do you take these very hard elements, we are working in Arunachal, where there's a lot of arsenic in the water, and it's very unhealthy for people. And we have engineers at Berkeley working on how to remove these heavy elements like arsenic from the system so that people can lead healthier lives. So that's one thing. Arsenic, is in water, heavy elements are in water. But one of the things that you emphasized, Seema, is we have been irresponsible and we have been contaminating water, which is preventable. So human beings are great in creating problems and then finding the solutions that are very expensive in solving them. So, and we think that we are heroes, and that's the other way around. So I think we need to begin with better stewardship from all what you have said, and I think we need to use technology not only to prevent further contamination or salvaging some of the water problems, but also a good balance of education and awareness is very, very much important. So I think I just want to take some questions from some of you, if I may, and see if I could answer some of those, because I'm definitely not an water expert, but I'm an expert in terms of understanding things in creating smart villages, what is needed, and how technology could help in this. And the company that invited me, Maithri, I was very impressed with their technology, and we're implementing that in some of the pilots. It basically takes air and converts it into water, at least for drinking purposes. But however, we need other technologies to take dirty water and and convert it into taking bath, washing our clothes. And that requires other technologies that that are affordable. See, most of these technologies, when you go to a 5-star hotel, I'm staying in one right now called JW Marriott in New Delhi. And this water here is recycled. It's not from a fresh source. They take the dirty water and they recycle it and they give it back to you. But the problem is, only a rich man can afford such a process. The poor man who's at the bottom of the pyramid cannot afford it. So we need to find affordable ways of technology solutions where the masses, people living at the very bottom, 5 billion people who live in rural areas and in poor areas of the world, have access to abundant source of water from which they can flourish. I think that's one area of focus that I'm working on, working at the University of California, Berkeley, with our engineering school. We have water experts there. But the most important thing I really believe is preventing the problem in the first place. I think if we have good, educated children that grow up as adults, become aware of the problems, and become better stewards, I think that is a much better way to solve it, rather than to create a problem and spend a lot of R&D, research and development and technology, and come up with a very expensive technology that makes it very unaffordable for the poor masses. And the rich man will survive any place. It doesn't matter. He has deep pockets. He can buy things. He can buy water. But I'm more concerned about the masses that need this kind of support. So that is, so Seema, do you have any questions for me that I can answer?
Yeah, basically, I like that you're working on smart village as an approach, which will take into account not just water, but everything else that comes along with it. And it's what is related to almost everything else. So how in your smart village concept, where do you start? What is the process? How do you organize? I've been involved in smart village concept for last 10, 15 years, and associated also with what they call as the Adarsha village, the ideal village project of government as well. So I would be very interested in hearing about your model.
Hello, I think you just broke up a little bit there, I think, in the connection here. If you can repeat the question, I'll truly appreciate it.
I said, I'm very interested in hearing about your smart village model. I'm also involved in similar processes, because it's good that you're taking a larger view and not just water, because water is part of almost everything else of village development. So how do you take that forward?
Very good. That's a good question. I get this question all the time. The way I define a smart village is totally different than most other people define it. Smart village is something what I call it's not infrastructure, it's not roads, it's not buildings, schools, and water tanks. What I believe a smart village is something where we build people. We build people's awareness, we empower them with the digital technology, and we also give them access, resources, and tools, so they are connected globally, so they become very, very educated, and they become very aware of their environment to contribute. A smart village is something that I believe that where most of the people in India live, 70%, almost 70% of our population lives there. And I also believe that they need to given access to resources and tools and information, they can develop themselves on their own. So the human DNA is very, very bright. It doesn't need a PhD. It doesn't not need a lot of education, but they are shut out from the connectivity to the rest of the world. So we need to bring Indian villages online so they become aware of things and see the whole picture, so they manage themselves and the resources around them much better. And that's what Smart Villages is all about. It's empowering people or building people, giving them access and resources at a very affordable rates. So my definition of a smart village is a community that is empowered with digital technology and open innovation platforms to access global markets. And so I believe that that doesn't cost a lot of money. It just gives the willingness of the government to have the right policies in place. I'm just returning from the vice chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. The reason I'm late for this meeting is because we signed an MOU with Niti Aayog and UC Berkeley. It's a 5-year commitment to develop solutions and to develop access to rural people so that some of these problems together can be solved. So sometimes it takes all the people to come together to solve problems. And this is one of those problems. Water problem is one of those problems. It takes everybody's support and help to do it. And so that's one of the things that I'm focused on these days. That's a good question. I can take another one if you have one for me.
Sir, one of our attendees have asked a question. So these days with rampant water scarcity, governments across the world, including India, are investing in large, capital projects such as desalination plants in locations such as, Chennai and other coastal regions. Given that these are not exactly sustainable, considering that the damage they do on ecologies, and what is basically your comment on projects such as this, such as desalination?
Yes, I think that is a band-aid. If you were to ask me, this water desalination, number one, it's very expensive, and anytime you build technology, either it becomes obsolete very quickly, and then you need to start with a new one. And in the process of building technology, you also pollute the air and the water. So you're not really solving the problem. And with the desalination, the ecosystem, also you're killing the ecosystem because the salt that is extracted has to go someplace. And when you dump it again back in different places, it kills that ecosystem. So one of the things that we are realizing every day, what happens in Wuhan, China, affects us over here in the United States and in India. So which means there's a domino effect now. So we cannot say we don't need each other. The world is connected. And so we just need to make sure that the ecosystem is friendly to each other. And there has to be an interrelationship that is healthy. Because even when I teach my business classes at Berkeley, I use what we call the ecosystem approach, which means that every part has a function and it needs to work in cooperation and coordination and interdependence with one another. That's how God built the planet. He built it so that a bunch of independent people live in it on their own and not care for the other. Or but they care for the entire system. It comes as one unit. So that interdependence and the giving and taking and being stewardship, that's how God made man. And so that stewardship is the process that by which we believe, which we don't teach in schools. We don't teach in schools values and morals and ethics and responsibility. We teach how to make money and how to go and get a job, how to become a doctor, make a lot of money, or become an engineer and go to America and make a bunch of money. See, we have a wrong premise. First of all, I think we need to teach children the values and respect for the planet, for what God has given us. And that is a good way to start. So we receive the wrong kind of education. So we just need to have our whole thinking in this transformed? That's a good question. Thank you for asking me that question. Anyone else?
Yeah, that actually answers, I mean, gives your view on one of the questions asked by another one of our attendees. So I'll redirect the question again to Ms. Seema. Ms. Seema, how would you, challenge those people or explain to those people in a simple way who don't actually realize what is going on at the current moment and tend to, continue the wasteful practices where, water wastage or, not fixing drippy faucets or stuff like that? What are your comments on this?
As Professor just now said, education is most important. The
Yeah.
earlier you do, the easier it is to talk to them. And I found that particularly when it comes to, say, a building or a village or as a community, water audits have been very, very useful to look at how much you get and how much you use. And if you were continue to use the way you are today, for how long there'll be availability. So once you know that by 2030, only 50% of today's water availability is going to be there, then people wake up really. So I think just not questioning them, but making them reflect, think, and decide for themselves. That's how I think adult education anyway works. So, and depending on people means who exactly. So for every type of, say, section of society, like if you're farmers, there's a different way you will talk to them. If they were teachers, then they have to look at this entire behavioral issue from a different lens. So depending on which people we are talking to, I'm more used to talking to farmers. So it's in that case very easy to say how much area you have, what is the rainfall. So therefore, how much rain has fallen on your ground, how much of that you are using, and what is the deficit. Mostly it is the deficit. So, and how has it impacted your productivity? So if we talk about that, it's very, very easy because it immediately converts into money. To get one more tanker of water to irrigate your water intensive crop costs their pocket. So I think it's only the urban class which does not earn their own water, but borrow it from nearby hinterlands. They are the one most difficult to talk to. I've never in my life worked on urban issues. Perhaps that's a gap because both are very interrelated. But somehow, right from the beginning, I've been in the rural sector. And my very first boss said that if you make urban areas more and more livable, nobody will be left in the villages. So decentralized smart villages perhaps is the only way. The urban lot is difficult to talk to because they take most things for granted. Resources, you throw money to get a bottle of water. They don't realize that you have to harvest it, then it falls. So, and nobody is today penalizing people for polluting water. So if that happens, like you break a signal, you have to pay fine today. And also in India, at least in Pune now, you are getting fines directly, you get bills. Earlier, this was never the case, and we only described this in Western countries. But people fall in line when next time you're caught, then you're told, okay, on such and such day, your vehicle was in this wrong parking. This is the photo. On such and such day, this is the signal that you broke. This is your photo. Then after 5 photos multiplied by 250 or 300 rupees each crime, then when you shell out those 1,500, you fall in line with all the traffic rules. So today, whether industries, whether housing societies, they are not given any limits as to how much they can use. And what if they go beyond? Water that goes into the society and goes out of the society, what comes in, what goes out, and how much you polluted this already. If that could be included to calculate tax, then things would be easier, I guess.
Thank you once again, ma'am. That was an insightful answer. Unfortunately, given the constraint of time, I'll have to end this episode right here. But once again, this was an incredible episode, having Professor Darwin from the University of California, Berkeley, and Miss Seema share their perspective. I would once again like to thank the Rotary Club's Bangalore White Central chapter for being a part of this episode, and the Rotarians in attendance, along with all our participants. Maithri Aquatech's AquaTalks will continue to be a regular knowledge-sharing webinar series, inviting experts such as those we have here today as panelists to share their thoughts and experiences. Thank you everyone for being in attendance. Stay safe, be water positive, and see you again for the next episode. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And also thanks for the Rotary members for sponsoring this event. And God bless you all, and stay safe.
Sir. Yeah.
Bye, everyone. There were good questions. I have tried to respond to some online, but people can contact us and you can share.
Yeah. So basically, I'll have a list of the questions anyway. I'll email those to you, ma'am. You'll be able to respond to them.
Okay.
All right, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.